is Hidden Killers Live with Tony Brueski, Stacey Cole, and Todd Michaels.
Big developments happening as we are inching our way towards the Brian Walshe murder trial. Big developments in terms of what Brian Walshe is saying he is responsible for and not responsible for after now almost 3 years of saying, I had nothing to do with any of it. We're going to break all of this down in these new developments and these challenges. Right before jury selection, Brian walked into court, raises his hand, and admits to two extremely serious charges: misleading investigators and willfully conveying or disposing of Ana Walshe's remains. The person he is also charged with murdering his wife. But he keeps his not guilty plea to murder. It's an unusual split. It's big, it's strategic, and it raises a ton of legal questions. We're going to break it all down right now. Eric Faddis, defense attorney and former prosecutor, is with us to help answer these questions. I want to break it down from both angles: the prosecution's interpretation and what you, as a defense attorney, would be thinking right now if this were your client. Let's just kind of start here and lay out what it is we're actually looking at. What does this plea actually mean, Eric?
Sure. So, Tony, it means a few things. One is that he will sustain convictions for those charges, misleading the police and also disposing of the body. And those charges are not unserious. I think misleading police carries approximately up to 10 years, the other charge up to 3 years. So some serious prison time on the table already. And then from there, the real question is going to be, how could these pleas affect the presentation of evidence at trial and affect what the jury hears, what they're allowed to consider, and what they're allowed to infer from them?
Why not just admit, hey, I did it? Why not just go all in for all of this? I mean, that's, as a layperson, my thought was, well, he's admitting part of this. Why not just go full bore?
You know, Stacey, it reminds me a little bit of the Robert Durst trial in Texas, where he was alleged to have killed a neighbor and disposed of the body. He couldn't beat the charge of disposing of the body, so he ultimately conceded that happened. In fact, I don't know if he was actually charged with that, but he made that concession to say, hey, I mishandled this situation horribly on the back end, but that doesn't mean I killed this person. And he was acquitted of the murder of that neighbor. Mm-hmm. Perhaps there's a similar strategy here.
Oh boy.
Which, I mean, this sort of thing happens all too often, and not because not every time someone dies in the presence of another is it murder. It's just not. But people tend to make really horrible decisions when put into really tough circumstances, and then you mix anything else that might have been going on here. This was New Year's Eve night into New Year's Day. I know they had a guest over. Some of the allegations were they had been drinking, enjoying themselves and whatnot, and then by like 3 or 4 in the morning, Brian is making these horrific Google searches about how to dispose of a body and all these things relating to how to deal with one who has died in a very inconspicuous way where others won't find out about it. But it doesn't necessarily mean that he killed her. Something else could have happened. She could have fallen downstairs. She could have something. I mean, there's all sorts of possibilities. Is there a likelihood that something happened? Sure, that's why he's on trial. But that's basically what the argument is right now. It's essentially, from understanding right, is, yeah, I did these things to conceal this, but it doesn't mean I actually killed her, right?
That's totally my read on it, Tony. And yeah, like you said, as distasteful as such a position might be, it doesn't require a conclusion that he killed his wife. Like you said, there could have been an accident that happened. Perhaps there was someone else present during the night who had some involvement, and then he freaked out and he panicked. And I think that'll probably be the narrative that the defense presents at trial. Like you said, this was chaotic. He didn't know what to do, and he was scared. And so he took the action he did. But that action is not equivalent to someone being guilty of murder, at least in and of itself.
So let me
No.
ask you this. Let me interject for just a second. So you're at a party. We've got the holidays coming. Your family comes over for Thanksgiving, and Uncle Bill starts choking on, a turkey bone, and dies, and everybody panics. Do people need to be afraid to alert the authorities if someone dies in front of you?
Yes, hide it as quickly as possible. Don't tell anyone.
But doesn't it just conjure up these pictures of, you call 911 if somebody dies in front of you, don't you? I mean, what are we fearing here? What are we supposed to do?
Stacey, that would be the common knowledge, right? Especially if there's an accident that caused the death in which there was no foul play. You would think that, oh my gosh, my relative, something bad happened to them. Let's call the police and go through the normal processes. But I think defense is going to say at trial, he wasn't thinking normally. It wasn't a normal situation. He didn't know what to do. He got scared, and he made a horrible decision. But yeah, when an accident happens, there's no necessarily criminal implications to reporting that accident to police.
And it's not like we have a track record of Brian Walshe being a great decision maker. From what we understand of him, what we know of him, he's sitting there on New Year's Eve wearing an ankle monitor because of his forged Andy Warhol photo or paintings that he, was selling online. So you got this going on. You have a wife that some allegations are that she was having an affair, that she was unhappy, that she wanted to leave. I can't imagine why she'd want to get away from such a winning man that she has here. So you have all these internal dynamics going on. And if you're already a bad decision maker, add a little alcohol to the mix. And that's just my own conjecture. Mm-hmm. I'm assuming it's New Year's. I don't know. Brian doesn't seem like he makes great choices, so I'm going to guess maybe there's some of that in the mix. And you're looking at the optics of this going, my wife is dead. Let's just play this for a moment that he didn't do something to her. Let's play it that she fell down the stairs or something. Something happened that she died that he was not truly responsible for, just for the sake of the argument. He's looking at the image and the optics of this. Already looks like an untrustworthy, shitty human being. Already has the ankle monitor. So with that being out there, you get caught committing another crime or even connected to one, you might go away pretty quickly, and you probably don't want that. And God knows what else he may not want dug up of what's going on around him and his life of thievery. And then you have the allegations that she's unhappy, that friends probably know she's unhappy, that she wants to get out of this, but she is still there. And so there could be some jealousy at play here. It could look pretty bad. The first thing you're going to think of, he killed his wife, even if you don't have any sort of evidence to it. So the idea that one may freak out and try to cover it up a bit isn't completely out of the question if the person is not a good decision maker, which he is not already. But the problem is there's so many other dark possibilities here that lean a lot more in the area of he probably killed her than it's a horrible accident. If there's a horrible accident, you typically don't have like a bloody knife in the basement. You don't typically have, her DNA down there as well with blood, and you have different things of hers at different dumpsters. That's not normal. That's not just a accident. But if he's coming out here and he's saying, yes, I did, essentially part of it is I concealed the truth here, and with this body of my wife, he could argue and he could say, I panicked, and yes, I did dismember her, but I didn't kill her. I dismembered her because I was trying to get rid of the body. That's why you have knife. That's why you have blood on this knife. That's why you have blood here. I'm curious as to how dark do you think this is going to get, Eric, when they try to start arguing this in court and start going down the road of what the hell they're going to say Brian was actually doing that night, where he did this, but not that.
Right. I think it's going to play out something like, defense is going to say, hey, look, being scared and being stupid is one thing, but that's not the same as being a murderer. And I think what they're going to say is that he realized people would perceive him as having a motive here, and he freaked out and made a horrible decision. And I think defense is also going to try to limit the evidence regarding misleading the police and limit the evidence regarding disposal of the body, because they're going to say, hey, it's no longer at issue. These aren't charges the jury has to decide. We don't need to go into days of testimony and evidence and photographs about all of this. That these charges have been concluded. And so really the real question is whether he caused the death of this person, for which there is less evidence.
But is the judge going to go with that? Is the judge going to say, okay, yeah, you pled guilty to these charges. We're all originally part of the same big case. And suddenly, just because you're now going to admit accountability to some of these, I mean, they do play into the rest of the case in many ways. Is a judge logically really going to say that these other steps in this case no longer are applicable because they play more to motives that he's admitting to, not necessarily to the actual crime of murder itself, but more so to the crime of cover-up, because that's where all the Google searches and stuff come in. Those are the pretty damning things that would make almost anyone get convicted of murder. Is a judge going to throw those sort of things out? This is a really interesting strategic move on the part of his defense.
I liken it to, and it's not perfectly analogous, but let's say there's like a vehicular homicide case where someone kills another person with an automobile, and then they don't report that accident. They just flee the scene because they're scared. And so they might argue later that, hey, we'll plead guilty to fleeing the scene, hit and run. But the question remains, was my client at fault for the accident? Did they, meet the elements of vehicular homicide and cause this in the way that the law requires it be proved? That question remains. That being said, I think this evidence is certainly relevant to whether he killed her or not. And I think the judge is not going to give Brian Walshe any sympathetic favors here, and will probably determine, hey, this, even though these charges are separate, the evidence supporting these charges are still relevant to the primary charge of homicide. So it's coming in, but there might be some minor limitations.
Wow.
Are you surprised that it's going to trial? This is one that I honestly thought early on, with the cascade of evidence that had come out, the Google searches especially, the evidence in the house, the dumpster, findings of what's been out there. Obviously no body, but there was a lot that pointed directly to Brian Walshe and his involvement in this, the cleanup stuff from Home Depot, all of it. I mean, you put it all together and it's like, this guy's guilty as shit.
It feels like it.
What do you think was going on behind the scenes here? Do you think that an attorney was sitting there saying, look, we need to kind of go for a plea here or something, because this is not defensible. There's no way I can spin this that's going to make any sort of sense at all. And do you think this was a compromise between the client, between Brian and his attorney, of, I'm not going to admit to the murder, but go ahead and we'll plead to these things, even though the attorney knows flat out, well, you're screwed no matter what. But okay, fine, we'll just go to pleading these couple things because that'll make Brian happy, the poor decision maker that he is.
It's a horrific look for Brian Walshe. All of this circumstantial evidence of the searches and the biological material and the apparent weapons within the vicinity, all of that is a huge problem. But from a defense standpoint, just kind of playing devil's advocate, anytime you don't have the body, you probably don't have cause of death. And so the prosecution has to prove that. They have to prove how this person was murdered if they're bringing a murder charge, at least in general terms. And I wonder if it was just sort of a strategic 11th hour decision to say, and perhaps he was being pressured by his counsel to consider a plea offer. And this is a way for his counsel to be able to argue, hey, look, he's owned up to what he did. He's been straight with this jury, whether that's true or not, about the actions that he took, but he's not going to admit to something he didn't do. And the cause of death is something he didn't do, and the prosecution can't prove to you how that happened. That might be the horse his defense rides at trial.
So we don't know if she was killed or if she just died. So who knows? There's your doubt, where the jury is going to sit there and go, I don't know how we're doing this.
Right.
Well,
and I mean,
is it reasonable?
That's a debatable question for sure. But I think his counsel for cross-examination, it's going to look something like, hey, can you tell this jury conclusively that she died of a gunshot wound? No. Can you tell the jury she died of a stab wound? How about a ligature strangling? How about a poisoning? Can you tell the jury anything about how this person died? And if the prosecution doesn't have at least some kind of satisfactory response, the jury might think to themselves, hey, is that doubt as to cause of death? And is it reasonable doubt? But yeah, that reasonable piece, Tony, is something that's certainly debatable.
I mean, is he, if you're going to go down this road and you're going to have this defense of, yes, I played a role in disposing of my wife's body, and yeah, that's why I made these Google searches, that's why this happened, and it explains those things away. Is he required? I mean, is there a way they can walk around this in some way, shape, or form and not answer the question of how she died? I would think that the defense is, if you're going to go down this road, you're going to have to come up with something as to, here's how she died, and here's why I reacted the way I did. Would you not? Or can you just simply is that part of the mystery? Is that part of the sowing of the doubt of, she's dead, here's what he did with the remains, but he's under no obligation to tell you exactly how she died. All he has to say is that he didn't do it.
Completely a question that will be ever present in the jury's minds is like, hey, if this dude was so involved with the immediate aftermath, wouldn't he know something about the precursors, about what led to this? But that being said, defense could say, hey, look, he's got a constitutional right not to testify. And people don't have to put themselves on the stand and be peppered with questions by a seasoned DA. He's already told you what he did via the convictions. And I think that probably protects him from having to testify about the disposal of the body and about misleading the police, because the facts of convictions, the court can take judicial notice of those. And so he doesn't have to get on the stand and say, hey, here's what happened after, here's why I did it, I'm so sorry, I freaked out. Instead, his attorney can argue that at closing without him being subject to cross-examination about the gruesome details of how that entire thing played out.
And what a horrible, let's take the human aspect here. Anna's family hearing this, hearing these details about how she was disposed of. They didn't get a proper burial, a proper ceremony, anything of that nature. Maybe now they have, but it's just disgusting. And so they have to live with these details now.
And there's kids.
Yeah.
There are children involved here that. So for the last 3 years, essentially, he's been lying to the family, lying to his kids, lying to everybody about his involvement about anything to do with, oh, by the way, Daddy did chop up Mommy and went to Home Depot and got all this stuff. And I mean, it's not like there was any real question that he didn't do those things. It's pretty black and white data that's there that's showing that he did. But here's why, basically, because I was scared and I needed to do something. That's not going to read well to a jury either. None of this looks good to a jury. Why? I guess the question is, why now? Why are they even doing this? Why do you think they decided right before jury selection, we're going to throw this shit to the table and see what it does? What is the goal?
What I've seen before, Tony, and what my apprehension is that it allows the defense to take responsibility for some of the horrible things that happen without taking full responsibility for the death of the alleged victim, and to argue to the jury that, hey, he's come to the table and he's owned up to what he did, and he's been convicted of those things, he'll be punished for those things, but they can't prove that he did the murder piece of this, and it allows them to sort of tell the jury he's taking responsibility without him needing to get on the stand, take responsibility, and then perhaps be completely annihilated by some sort of cross-examination about the details.
I mean, does the bigger man argument work here when he's lied for the last 2 years, misled police investigations and all? I mean, I would think that a jury's going to go, okay, well, if you're the bigger man and you really cared about your wife and getting justice for her, or just dealing with reality on reality's terms for the sake of your family, these children and everyone around you, you're not the bigger man. You've literally lied for the last 3 years about all of this. And there's probably not like a real killer somewhere if it's going to be an accident type defense, because I'm guessing he's not going to say someone swooped in, murdered her, and then went off into the night. But who knows? Anything, I guess, is possible. The optics of I'm doing the right thing now, I feel like it comes a little bit too little too late.
Oh, it could ring very hollow for this jury. And you're right. He has allegedly a history of deception, not only deceiving the police in his wife's disappearance and disposal of her body, but also in prior fraud issues. He allegedly sold these Andy Warhol paintings that were fraudulent for tens of thousands of dollars or something. He was ordered to pay like $400,000 plus in that case. So he's not the kind of, saint who's coming forward and saying, hey, look, I'm owning up to this, I did it, in terms of disposing of the body. And so, yeah, the jury, especially if he tries to argue that he's taken responsibility and being straight with them, the prosecutor might on rebuttal say, oh, well, there's a reason you shouldn't trust Brian Walshe. And not only is it this case, but it's other cases too.
I was going to ask, are they allowed to bring in that previous charge with the Andy Warhol stuff?
It's going to be a really sort of tedious evidentiary question, Stacey, because if the defendant testifies, then prior acts of dishonesty are typically admissible. But what about if the defendant doesn't testify and the fact of the convictions are the only thing that comes in? Does that qualify as a statement from the defendant that can be impeached by prior acts of dishonesty? It gets it's almost like a law school exam. It gets to be a very sort of convoluted evidentiary analysis, and there's no clear-cut answer. It'll be up to the judge.
Damn.
At this point, do you think he is going to testify? We're obviously, that's kind of like a last ditch effort here, but I'm wondering, it feels like they're throwing Hail Marys right now and we're not even into the trial. That's why I'm wondering, like, I don't know. I don't know that you're going to be able to sell your story with the witnesses that you're about to present. And if especially when you've just come out and said that you handled the body and lied to police for the last 3 years. I would think you would need to be on that stand to tell your side of the story if you have a chance in hell of a jury believing you.
I think it's hard to say. There's always pitfalls and perils with a defendant testifying. Brian Walshe strikes me as kind of a audacious fellow, sort of someone who is a risk taker, who might have a diluted sense of self-confidence. And so perhaps he chooses, because it'll be up to him, not his attorneys. It's up to Brian whether he wants to testify. And if he does get up there, are there other witnesses who are present when his wife actually died? Because if not, if the other guests had already gone, then it's Brian's word, and there's no other witness who can be called to contradict that. It would only be cross-examination, and we'd have to see if he stood up to that sort of crucible.
And I believe the only witness that there was a friend of theirs. I think it was a friend of hers more than him. I'm just trying to recall it. And if I remember right, he had talked about there was like nothing amiss about the evening from the way he has described it in interviews of just, it's a lovely evening. We got together for New Year's. We had some drinks. We had some food. Then I went home at about X time and then found this out the next day of just like, holy crap. Like, what the hell happened after this? If that holds up for what it is and that there wasn't anybody else. But I believe it was just one friend that hung out with them on New Year's, and they watched Dick Clark's Rockin' New Year's and had a rockin' good time, and then all this shit went down. This is a case too where it feels like they have for the many years this has been going on, has been looking for anything and everything they can possibly point to either get this thing dismissed, to put some sort of doubt into the waters, to do whatever they can. And one of those big things has been Michael Proctor, who was also, of course, of the Karen Reed case. And trying to, because he was one of the lead investigators at the beginning. So they were saying, well, look over here. Look all the convoluted crap that's going on over here. So it must be going on over here too. That didn't hold a whole lot of water. None of it really came to much fruition in this case because of his own actions, of Brian's own actions in this case. But when we see that they were trying to go down these kind of low-hanging fruit paths the entirety of 3 years, it reminds me of Kohberger in some ways. It reminds me in a lot of cases where we got nothing, so we're going to go for anything we can possibly go for and stretch this time out as best as we can. It just feels like they may have run out of fruit.
It very well could be. And when you get in dire straits as defense counsel, you've got to do what you can. And especially recently, that there is a lot more, in my opinion, skepticism of police misconduct and shoddy police work. And juries really hate that. And so, perhaps as defense, do you try to craft a narrative? I'm not saying I would do this necessarily, but do you try to craft a narrative that, hey, this was flawed from the outset, and you have this bad actor, this villain. Remember when he jumped to conclusions about Karen Reed and he was acquitted? That's what he did here, and that's why you have no evidence of the cause of death and everything else. At least that's how the defense argument will go. I think there are counter arguments to that kind of thing, but some jurors really latch on to say, hey, this needs to be a fair process, a fair investigation, and with this guy sort of rearing his ugly head again, can we really put our faith in what the police did here?
Yeah, I mean, and it's a fair question. It is, until you start looking at the evidence of the case and you go, Proctor had absolutely nothing to do with all of these things that Brian Walshe did on his own and chose to do on his own. And now it seems like he's trying to come up with some sort of explanation for it. But it was this bad, but not quite that bad. We'll see how that plays with the jury. It's going to be real fascinating to watch. Interested to get everyone's thoughts in the comments section on YouTube. I want to talk about another case here today. That, of course, Brian Kohberger. Not the criminal aspect of this anymore, but I guess where it's naturally going now, civil. The Goncalves family is now going after Washington State University, essentially saying you had the guy in your building, in your program, on your payroll, and you had warning after warning that something wasn't right, and you didn't do enough. We've seen the police reports and the post-sentencing document dumps, more than a dozen formal complaints, women saying they felt trapped and unsafe. A professor warned that if WSU gave him a PhD, they'd end up reading about him stalking and abusing students. Now, the families are packaging all of that into a civil claim and asking a court to decide whether WSU dropped the ball in a way that the law actually recognizes. So I want to get into this with Eric Faddis, defense attorney and a former prosecutor, and look at the roadmap here. What evidence we really have, what a plaintiff's lawyer is going to have to prove, what WSU's defenses look like, and whether this is a long shot leverage play or a very real liability problem for the university. Eric, first off, from a prosecutor turned civil litigator lens, how do you see this when you hear that the Goncalves family is pursuing a claim against Washington State University? What do you understand that to mean in practical terms here?
Sure. From a practical perspective, it absolutely makes sense because the Goncalves family is trying to find some kind of solace, some kind of remedy within the civil court system. The criminal system did not get the outcome they wanted. And so Kohberger doesn't have any money. They can't go after him for millions of dollars. So they've got to look to some other entity with deep pockets, enter the university. And then what's going to be really critical is what did the university know before this happened? And was the university negligent? And did that negligence, was it a substantial factor in causing what happened? These are all serious legal issues, and I think there are arguments on both sides.
What responsibility does an employer have to protect its employees? I mean, get down to the nitty gritty here. If you've got multiple complaints about an employee, and Tony, you and I have worked in some places where we've had similar situations, not to this extreme, but there has to be some mechanism that kicks in that starts to protect the innocent people and take that perpetrator and say enough is enough. What safeguards are there in our world for this?
Yeah, Stacey, employers are in a bit of a difficult position because they have to take any complaints seriously and ones that appear credible that they should investigate and they should report if appropriate. On the other hand, they also kind of have maybe not a legal duty of loyalty to their employee, but perhaps they feel some sense that, hey, this person's kind of on our side, and we've got to ensure that these aren't just some false allegations, some false complaints, perhaps some impure motives or something by people who are coming forward. And so it's a delicate balance that they have to do, but ultimately they have a legal responsibility to make sure they're not negligent in addressing those complaints and that something horrible doesn't happen that could have been caused by their negligence. And so tough position for employers in that situation.
Yeah.
It's kind of, I mean, damned if you do, damned if you don't. We don't know all the details yet about exactly what is going to come out, but I'm very curious to see just how many complaints were filed, what the nature is of all of those complaints, how they were handled. I mean, it's going to come down to that, I think, probably more than anything, is it not? Of did they take these threats seriously, and did they act in a reasonable way? Reasonable being key.
100%. Reasonableness is really at the heart of negligence. Did they act like a reasonable entity would, or did they take action that was for which it was foreseeable that something horrible could have happened due to their omissions and their lack of investigation, that kind of thing. And Tony, you talk about one complaint, that's a thing. It should be taken seriously. Two complaints, it's starting to escalate now. But when we start to have a multiplicity of complaints over a period of time that perhaps have a common thread, I think the employer really has a legal responsibility to investigate that and to take action to make sure they are not somehow complicit or culpable in something this person could do because they knew about it and they didn't take enough reasonable action to protect folks from this person and what they knew about him. That's going to be at the center of the case.
I guess when we look at this, and again, we don't know what all of those complaints were. We've seen, bits and pieces of them here throughout the years, and they've all kind of pointed to the character that we understand Kohberger to be, but none of them, I mean, unless I'm missing something and it's not coming to my mind at this moment, so correct me if I'm wrong, if somebody remembers something differently, none of them were like, oh my God, this guy is going to go commit a quadruple homicide, or oh my God, this guy is going to assault me later today or right now. It's all, from everything we've seen, they were creepy. He was awkward. He didn't seem to know boundaries. He didn't seem to know what's appropriate at times. But we didn't really see anything that went beyond that. And look, there's weird, bizarre, creepy-esque people that come across creepy in our society, whether they intend to or not. I think Kohberger's a different animal because we, hindsight, learned a hell of a lot more about what was behind that facade. But leading up to it, he wasn't making lamps out of people's, thighs and things like that. He was pretty low key, maybe too quiet, maybe too low key. It's a very big ask to say to a university or any entity, how did you not see this? How did you not step in and stop something if there really wasn't a lot to stop? being awkward, being socially awkward, not knowing, where to stand, not realizing you're blocking people in a way, having awkward conversations. None of those are crimes. And none of those things are prosecutable. And in a lot of cases, they're not fireable either, because many will argue in many cases that person, and in many cases the reality is the person who's acting so awkward has a form of autism and doesn't get those normal cues and are a lot of times harmless, but do come across awkward because they scare us, because we've seen just how far some of these things could go. Is this going to be a tough fight going after them legally? Do you think this will ever make it to an actual courtroom, or just the mere thought of this and these accusations that are going to come out are going to make WSU say, here's a check, please go away. We'd rather not have this in the headlines for the next 5 years.
A few points. So a legal linchpin of this civil case against the university is going to be foreseeability, which is what you were just touching on. Was it foreseeable that the actions the university took after having this information would have caused this individual to go out and murder 4 people? Is that really foreseeable based on the information they had? That's questionable. On top of that, on sort of the flip side, that there is certainly a PR and optics incentive for the university to not want to get too deep into the woods on discovery, on exactly what the complaints were, on exactly what the university knew and exactly what they did. But lastly, another question is going to be, based on the information they had, did the university take reasonable measures? Because that's really their duty. And if so, the university is going to say, what did you want us to do? Call the police about something that's not a crime? Fire the guy and risk liability on our end? Did you want us to do like a national press release on so that everybody in the world or in the hears the information we have? What reasonable measures did they want this university to take? And so I think it's going to get pretty messy, and the university has an incentive to try to kind of nip it in the bud, pay some money, and get out of it.
But hang on just a second. Okay, they have a criminology department that he's part of. They actually study this. It's not like he's working at an insurance company and he's some auditor and he's just crunching numbers and he's weird. He's actually in the criminology department. These are experts on exactly this thing. They're not the
administrators.
Correct, but do they have the power to go to the administrators and go, we study this stuff every day. We teach what we're seeing here. We are concerned about something. Do they have an extraordinary duty because of their expertise?
I think it's a creative argument that the plaintiffs might bring, Stacey, because in terms of deciding whether the entity acted reasonably, the inquiry is going to be whether an entity in the same or similar circumstances would have acted the same way. And so those circumstances could include specializations within that entity and information they had. And, if this was, a school that only did engineering, do they have, do the actions they take appear reasonable as compared to a school that actually does specialize in criminology stuff? Is there sort of a heightened burden and creative argument?
But here again, and you have conflicting viewpoints from various people who were interacting with him. On one hand, and this is just the knowledge that we know about this, Ramsland has come out. Catherine Ramsland has said, I didn't see anything weird with him. She was just as surprised as everybody else. I'm paraphrasing, but she has never come out and said, oh my gosh, yeah, red flags with this guy all the way. In fact, very much the opposite is the way she's expressed her thoughts of Brian Kohberger. But then you also have an unnamed faculty member who in a meeting did say something to the effect of basically, if we keep this guy, if we give this guy a degree, if we graduate him and give him the title, we're going to see him in headlines. So, I mean, it's perspective, but I think the university on one hand can say, look, the person who's one of the foremost experts in the country, in the world on serial killers and people like this, didn't see this coming. and they work for us. How the hell do you expect an administrator to have known more about this or have seen more of this coming? This is someone who, right dead on, didn't see it coming. Some people got icky vibes. Some people got weird vibes, and rightfully so. He was icky and weird. But again, doesn't make him a murderer at that moment in time, and doesn't make anybody a predictor of the future. If you go out and interact with a bunch of autistic people, and you have them all certified as none of them are offenders of any sort, none of them are doing all sorts of horrible shit on the side, they're just awkward, you're going to have plenty of people who will walk away from that experience going, I think this person does this, I think this person does that, and in the end, no, they're just autistic, and they can't communicate the same way other people do.
Yeah, I think it's a really important point, and a way that the university is going to buttress its defense. Because my gosh, if this individual who is intimately familiar with criminology and murderers and that kind of thing, if it wasn't foreseeable to her, how is it foreseeable to some administrator who has no such specialization? I think that foreseeability piece is going to be big. I think that there's usually a doctrine in most states called an intervening actor event, whereby even if the university maybe should have handled it differently, was that the intervening act so material to the ultimate outcome that it means that the university was not responsible, that intervening act being Kohberger slaughtering 4 people.
Yeah, I mean, I want to play all the angles of this. I mean, I want people to be responsible, especially schools and school districts and universities and all of that don't take predatory behavior seriously. I'm big on that. And there's too much of what's called passing the trash, and this is not applicable in this situation, but we see it a lot in elementary education and things of that, where you will have a teacher that has complaints in one district about something. The district doesn't want the attention. They don't want the bad PR. They have the person resign. And then that track record, there's no national database for this. Some states have them. Some states don't. Some follow them to a rule. Some have little loopholes here and there, and then that person just slyly and quietly moves on to their next job. Those sort of things need to be, parsed out, as do when you have a series and a pattern of complaints in a university setting against a student, against a teacher, against a teaching assistant, as Kohberger was. There needs to be a clearer path to resolving and dealing with these issues in a more concise, in a more timely manner. Eventually, they did get rid of him. I'm sure they're going to argue that too, of like, look, we were in the process of doing all this. The ball was certainly rolling, but we had to meet certain benchmarks before we could do that. Maybe it's going to be a review of those processes, and there'll be less boxes to check before action can be taken. But I think it's important that we look at this and look at who are the real boogeymen here. Is it really WSU? Is it more just Kohberger? Is it the system as a whole? Is it what is wrong, or is there nothing wrong? And this is just really someone who was able to blend in and to be a chameleon until he decided he wasn't a chameleon no more.
I fully sympathize with the victims' families of trying to squeeze out some semblance of justice here, and exploring every avenue they can. That being said, I'm not sure it makes sense to demonize the university. I'm not saying that's what the family's doing, but if we got to the trial phase, there'd probably be some pretty unkind words regarding the university. What more could they have done? And I think that this intervening actor thing, that the fact that, hey, the university would say, hey, this was Kohberger. It wasn't the teacher at the university who went and knifed 4 college students 1 state away. This was the acts of a crazy psychopathic serial killer. He's the one who's responsible here, and the university is kind of just being looped in on this. That's how defense will likely play it.
This is being filed as a tort claim. Right now, a lot of this is in the form of that and those notices. For people who aren't lawyers, Eric, what is the difference here between filing a tort claim and actually filing a full-blown lawsuit?
Different states use different nomenclature. A tort is typically just a civil wrong, and it usually means like it's often associated with negligence. And in fact, the claim itself can be filed with the university and with the university's insurance carrier without a lawsuit being filed at all. The lawsuit is sort of the final step if you can't resolve the claim during the claims process with the insurance adjuster. And so, there are multiple levels to bringing these sorts of allegations and trying to seek redress. And, we certainly aren't at the trial phase in a lawsuit at this point. That would be months or potentially years down the road.
And with something like this, whether this makes it to a actual trial or not, we have yet to see. Time will tell on that. When things like this happen and you have something like this coming to light, you have the family of these victims going after this university that employed him, not the same university that their kids were attending, keep in mind as well. Washington State is not Idaho State. They're different universities altogether. It was the one Kohberger was actually teaching at, not the ones that their children were attending. When you have things like this coming about, do we see change within universities or whatever setting it may be? Do they tend to go back when they're faced with legal repercussions, monetary repercussions, or insurance companies saying, we're not going to deal with this shit again? Do you think we're going to see some sort of change in policy at the very least, whether they end up paying out to the families or they're found guilty or innocent or whatever? At the end of the day, is this going to likely spark some sort of reform within the power structure there, within how they're handling things internally, so they don't run into this sort of a scenario again?
It would certainly behoove the university to take subsequent remedial measures to try and ensure that this type of situation doesn't happen again, to the extent that they can do that. And I think that civil litigation can be a vehicle for that kind of change. If the university and or its insurer is popped for a lot of money, not only can that change policies and procedures, but sometimes the underwriters, sometimes the insurance carriers who insure these massive entities like a university might put additional requirements down. They might say, hey, in order for us to continue insuring you, you need to impose these additional requirements. You need to impose these additional conditions, these additional procedures if such an issue arises again. And so sometimes you can compel reform through civil litigation in, kind of albeit in a convoluted way.
Mm-hmm. What do we got in the comments right now, Stacey? I know there's a lot of questions about this situation.
Yeah, talking about, if the whole faculty of, and this is from Nina Chandra, the whole faculty of the Criminal Justice Department knew something was different about him. They just couldn't find a viable solution to get him out of the program because he was at the top of his class. And that's something that makes it even harder. He was a good student. So what do you do?
There are ethical considerations for universities. There are legal considerations for universities within that context. We can't have an environment in which, someone acts a little different and all of a sudden we, cast them out on the street or something like that. We've got to be sort of nuanced in how we're viewing a person's behavior and how we're assessing potential complaints and that kind of thing. And so I think it's a tricky situation for these universities because there are mental health issues. There are psychological diagnoses like autism, bipolar, borderline personality. There's a number of things that shouldn't preclude a person from employment unless there is a serious risk of danger. And so it's that unless part that I think we need to be vigilant about as well.
Jeff also says, and he's taking us back to the movie Office Space. I love this. Reminds me of the movie Office Space, where the odd employee Milton, who under his breath says, I could burn this place down, then that happens. Maybe it's about how clear the warning signs were. It's a good point.
Yeah, very much so. And sometimes it's really hard in the moment to have clarity on those things. Some person says, "Hey, this guy is being kind of creepy, I think." Well, does that mean, we call the police? Does that mean we fire him on the spot? Does that mean we put him in some sort of program or required treatment? It's just very difficult in terms of what the university's response should be and what they really knew.
Another one that Jeff had, and I'm curious about it. Will the WSU case bring about testimony from previous employment of Brian Kohberger's? I'm curious about that because we have seen others say, "Yep, he was employed here. We got nothing else to say." I'm wondering. I mean, would they have to be named in a suit or some sort for any of their history or records of him to come to light, or could those sort of things be part of discovery in a case like this, if we ever get that far?
The central inquiry is, what did Washington State University know, and what action did they take, and not what former employers knew. However, I think that there's a way plaintiffs might angle this by saying, before you hire someone, you got to look into their background, don't you? You got to make sure you're not hiring some complete psychopath. And does that impose a duty upon the university to talk to former employers to say, "Hey, were there any complaints about this guy? Were there any allegations? Were there any problems you had with him?" And through that avenue, we could see information from former employers.
Aren't employers' hands tied a bit with what they can disclose about previous employment? They can say, yes, they were fired, but they can't go into more detail, or am I misunderstanding that?
Stacey, my understanding is that state law varies considerably on that issue. And so, some state laws say, yeah, a former employer can tell you whatever they want, whereas others, there are privacy considerations and including if there were internal investigations at former employers, those things can have privacy considerations that could prevent the disclosure of information that came out during those investigations. So, kind of it varies state by state, and it's kind of unclear right now.
Yeah, I think I'm in a state in Wisconsin where I don't think you can divulge a whole bunch of information. You can just say, we terminated this person, and then you're just left to fill in the blanks about why.
Although in a situation like this, when the person's behind bars for the rest of their lives, there's probably a little more, I would imagine, that could be shared at this point. I don't know that you're fearing a lawsuit, because that would be traditionally why those sort of things would be in place and why they can't in a normal situation. With the dynamics here, though, I think it does raise itself to a very different place. There was one where I want to address: why do many Americans see dollar signs when a loved one dies? I don't think that is the motivation of the Goncalves family here at all. I think there's maybe one or two things going on. I think one is we're going to have to make you maybe look at your policies a little bit more and change it to do better so this doesn't happen to other people. And sometimes the only way to get institutional change is by putting pressure under them financially, unfortunately.
It's a mechanism.
Exactly. That's why I think they might be using this as a mechanism for that. I don't think they're looking necessarily at this as, hey, it's going to be a big payday for us. Do people abuse the system and things like that? Yeah, without a doubt. But is that what's going on here? No. I really do not think that is the matter at hand. And we'll see. We'll see what happens if real meaningful change takes place. I know another comment after that said it's more so about exposing Kohberger for who he is and who he was, since the system shut all that down really quick with the plea deal. And maybe that's the other part of it too. Let the world see what the monster was. Don't just let him go hide in the cell for all of eternity. There are other levers that the Goncalves family and anyone can really pull who's been directly affected by this, if they want to let the mask come off of Kohberger even more than it already has. It's a fascinating discussion. We'll see where this goes, and if there's more civil litigation in the future. But I imagine that's going to be the next step in this, with probably several entities, but we'll have to wait and see. Eric Faddis, defense attorney, former prosecutor, as always, thank you for coming on and giving us your insight. Always so valuable. Thank you again.
Great to be with y'all.
And for the rest of us, for Todd, for Stacy, I'm Tony Brueski. We will talk again real soon.
Want more on this case and others? Then press subscribe now and don't miss a moment of true crime coverage from Tony Brueski and the Hidden Killers podcast.